Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Firstborn, which is episode 21 of season 7 of Star Trek Next Generation. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek Next Generation, one episode at a time. In this video I cover the 7th season episode Firstborn. So Firstborn is the episode in which an attempt is made on Worf's life, and a Klingon guard from the House of Mogh, who's there to protect the house, arrives and saves Worf and helps to teach Alexander the ways of Klingons, because Alexander's first age of ascension is approaching, where he will learn how to be a warrior, but he is not sure he wants to be a warrior. And this is not okay with Kimpar, the Klingon from House of Mogh, because he knows that Alexander is the only heir to the House of Mogh, and that one day he will lead the house. Therefore, he needs to learn how to be Klingon. So Kimpar makes friends with Alexander and seems to be able to understand him and can sympathize with him, and so tries to speak to him on that level and become friends with him. And it seems to be going well. Meanwhile, they're looking for Lursa and B'Etor, because they're the ones who sent the assassins to kill Worf. And Riker manages to be very exceptional, and contacts Quark from DS9 and manages to get a tip on where to find the Dora Sinisters. Eventually they do find them. However, they deny having sent assassins to kill Worf, and the evidence that they have is a knife from the House of Duras, and on the knife it has the symbol for Lursa, B'Etor, and their son. However, Lursa is just found out she was pregnant a couple days ago and didn't tell anyone but B'Etor, so they're confused on how that can be on the knife. Then Kimpar, once Alexander refuses to become a warrior and says that he's not going to Klingon homeworld and he's staying with Worf, Kimpar pulls a disruptor on him while he's sleeping, and Worf sees this and threatens to kill Kimpar, but then Kimpar reveals that he's actually Alexander from the future, that he traveled back in time from 40 years in the future and set up the assassination to try to make Alexander see make him feel powerless and make him want to be a warrior. And he's sent back trying to change the past to make Alexander embrace his Klingon heritage more and be more of a warrior, because he becomes a diplomat in the future and tries to make peace between House of Mogh and House of Duras, even though Worf says it's not going to happen. And because of the attempts, the Duras family takes advantage of this and tries to kill them, and does manage to kill Worf. And so Alexander feels guilty over this, thinking it's his fault, and so had traveled back in the past in order to change things. However, Worf says that he has changed things with Worf. He's made him see that Alexander should follow the path, whatever path he wants to follow. And they part on good terms, and Alexander presumably returns to the future. So this episode, I said something similar in Deep Space Nine, I just realized. But this episode, there was 3 episodes in TNG. This episode, the next 2 episodes, Bloodlines and Emergence. For whatever reason, I did not record these on VHS. So, as this season of TNG and the season of DS9 was airing, I was recording every single episode off the TV on VHS and watching them repeatedly throughout the years. But for this episode, I remember the reason why I didn't record is because I started to record it, but the tape ran out. 90s problem. Because usually I had to try to keep track of how many episodes on each tape, because if I tried to put too many episodes, the tape would run out and would like stop in the middle. Like, it was such such an annoying thing, and I'd be like, God damn it, when it happened, because I'll be watching the episode, really into the episode, all of a sudden I hear a like the tape stopping and then rewinding because it hit the end, and I'm like, fuck. And so this happened to me several times before while I'm recording Star Trek, but usually I would, because they show the episode twice a week, so usually I would catch it again on the second airing and then record it then. But for whatever reason, I didn't do that this time. I forgot to do it with this episode, so I missed it. Again, back in the 90s, it's not like you can watch any episode whenever. You have to catch it when it's airing on TV, otherwise you miss it. And also, for whatever reason, I didn't record the next two episodes either, which was out of character because I've been recording every single episode of TNG. But as I mentioned, I actually missed 3 episodes of DS9 not that long ago as well. So I don't know, I guess I was just slacking. And so for the longest time, when I go back and watch episodes of TNG over and over again, I would do it with the VHS tapes, so I did not have these 3 episodes, Firstborn, Bloodlines, and Emergence. So therefore, I've seen all the other episodes, especially of Season 7, way more than I've seen these. These 3 were kind of always like the missing link, which I didn't actually see again until, I don't know if it was like all the way till the early 2000s when I got the DVDs. I might have seen them. It might have been. I might have recorded them off of the TV in the late 90s, but I don't think so. I think I didn't see these again until I know I must have watched them sometime in the late 90s. I don't know. Maybe so, maybe not. Maybe it was the early 2000s. But anyway, so, yeah, during that time, I've watched all the other episodes of TNG over and over and over again, but these 3 were always kind of an enigma to me. And I'd only seen them once when they first aired. Now, the next 2 episodes, Bloodlines and Emergence, I don't like them. And I remember not liking them. And when I saw them again after all those years, I was like, yeah, these episodes are not good. So I'm not missing. I wasn't missing much. I don't really miss them. I'm actually okay with the fact I hadn't seen them that many times. This episode, on the other hand, I remember liking. In fact, I used to put it in like top 10s, top 40s, even though I didn't have it on VHS. I was just going off of memory the one time that I saw it years ago. But once I did finally see it, I'm like, I think the expectations I've been building in my mind for years was too high. It was like greater than I was remembering. Oh, this is such a great episode because it has Alexander from the future. And so when I finally watched it again, I was like, I mean, it's good, but it's not that good. So I was disappointed because it didn't meet like the expectations that I had built up in my mind. But watching it now, I still have a feeling that it's less familiar to me than all the other episodes of TNG. It feels kind of like an enigma still, because I've seen it way less than I've seen of the other episodes. I mean, same is true of Bloodlines and Emergence, but since I don't like those episodes, I don't really mind. It doesn't like stick out as much to me because I don't care about those episodes. But this one I do like. So, like this scene when Quark appears. Like, I remember intellectually that Quark appeared in this episode and in TNG, but it still feels weird to me as I'm watching the scene. I'm like, this, it just feels out of place. It feels like a weird scene, like it doesn't really belong in TNG. But watching this episode now, I appreciate it more because I don't have those high expectations anymore. In fact, I kind of thought, oh, it's not that good. But watching it again, I actually think it is better than I remember. I think I was being unfair, like expecting it to be some masterpiece, which it isn't. But it is actually a really good episode. Now, granted, the future, the time travel element, I guess technically this is a time travel episode, even though that's kind of a spoiler to say it is a time travel episode, because that's the twist that Kimpar, or however you say his name, I wasn't sure if I'm saying that right, but I can't remember. But anyway, that Klingon dude is actually Alexander from the future. And yeah, I did not see that twist coming. Like, that twist really blindsided me. And that's why I was like, loved it at first, because I was so awed by it. But then when I watched it again, I was like, oh, like, they don't even reveal that until the end, and most of the episodes just Worf and Alexander kind of fucking around. But watching it now, I look at it differently. I don't look at it as Alexander and Worf fucking around. I look at it as a good character story. It's actually one of the few episodes that Worf is a good father. It ends with Worf being a good father to Alexander, which unfortunately Deep Space Nine completely ruined. And like, that's why a lot of people who say Worf is a bad father, it's mainly due to DS9. If DS9 did not bring Alexander back, then, and they left it off in good terms, then Worf would be a good father. In fact, like, the fact that Worf just sent Alexander back to Earth to live with his grandparents, he might as well send him to Klingon, to Kronos to live with other Klingons, because he's just sending him away constantly. But anyway, if it wasn't for that though, you would actually think that I would argue that Worf is a good father, because it's building towards like his previous stuff. I mean, he's kind of being a bad father, but kind of just struggling how to be a good parent. And here it seems to be a story arc for him where he learns how to be a good father. Like the episodes before could be justified as the journey on the way of learning how to be a good father. And in this episode, he succeeds. But then again, as I said, Deep Space Nine completely ruins that. But if you forget about what happens in the two episodes that Alexander appears in Deep Space Nine, just touched by this episode, then you could actually say that Worf is a good father. And speaking of Deep Space Nine, I think I do have to mention that, even though I'm getting into future spoilers, but I do all the time. Is that it ruins Alexander's character because he wants to join the Klingon fighting force, the Klingon military. And Worf even says, like, why would you want to do that? You said that this isn't your way. You want to be more human. He's like, oh, I don't have to answer to you, blah, blah, blah. But he's correct. Like, he's speaking for the audience because this is out of character. It's character assassination. I just talked about it in the last TNG episode. Although I'm talking about not this episode, but the DS9 episode, Sons and Daughters, where Alexander appears. That's character assassination for Alexander. He shouldn't, like, it's out of character for him to join the military. And it's inconsistent with this episode, because this episode ends with him deciding he wants to go his own way and be his own person. In fact, we see in the future he's a diplomat. And that's contradicting it by making him join the Klingon military. Now, there was a B canon novel that it was a series of like 8 different novels, and it seems like the whole point of it was to make Nemesis fit into canon because a lot of stuff is like doesn't make sense, and not just Nemesis, as I said, it course corrects for Alexander's his character assassination that they did in DS9 because you know how at the end of Deep Space Nine, Worf became the ambassador to Kronos. Well, it explains why Worf is a lieutenant or commander again back on the Enterprise, chief of security on Nemesis, because the movie itself, he just pops up there. Apparently, the writer had written a scene that explains why Worf returned to Starfleet, but it was cut from the movie, so the theatrical cut of the movie is just like Worf is just there for no explanation. But this B-canon novel makes it so, explains that Worf is on this diplomatic mission, he meets up with Alexander, and they go on this adventure, and at the end of the adventure, he resigns as ambassador and hands it over to Alexander, saying, "You're the true ambassador, you're the diplomat." And so now, so that course corrects not only for Worf, but also for Alexander. And so I like to think that B-canon is actual canon. To me, that is more canon than the DS9 shit. Because, yeah, that would fit it better in this episode. And it makes sense that Alexander would grow up to be an ambassador. Now, one of the things that I do really appreciate about this episode, as I said, I appreciated a lot more this watch around. And I think last time when I did my Season 5 review, I also appreciated it a lot. So it's not like this is the first time I'm appreciating it. But one of the things I appreciate is that watching this episode again after you know what the twist is, makes you look at it, you notice things, and it makes it kind of clear. It's like, I see how this is Alexander, like they're dropping hints. And that's clever. That's good. Those are the best kind of twist stories, episodes, or movies. The ones that when you watch it again, it makes the twist make sense. That's why I harped against the whole bullshit thing about the Flash Sideways and Lost. Because if you go back and watch the Lost again, it's not those Flash Sideways, the twist actually doesn't make any sense, and they didn't build up to it at all. Whereas if you have a good twist, like The Sixth Sense or something like that, when you go back and watch it, you'd be like, the twist is like, oh, I can totally see it. They were dropping hints all along. Those are the best twists. And that's also my favorite kind of stories, the ones where if you watch it multiple times, you pick up more things. And you're like, okay. You get more out of it, and it makes you look at it from a totally different perspective. Which I think is brilliant. And what I mean about this episode, how this episode specifically does that, is you can tell, you drop hints that this is Alexander, because Kimpar is able to relate to Alexander. He's able to understand what he's going through, and once you have the knowledge that this is future version of Alexander, it becomes clear why. Because he is Alexander. He remembers what it's like to be young Alexander, and that's how he's able to relate to him. He's like, because he, when he says things like, "Oh, you were scared, weren't you? You felt like you could have helped your father," and that's how they became good friends. That's why Alexander warmed up to him so much, is because he knew exactly how to communicate with Alexander. Now, when you first watch it, you think that he's just good with kids. But when you watch it again, it's like, no, that's how he knows how to relate to Alexander, because he is Alexander. And that's actually really clever. That is something that I really enjoy out of watching it. And that's how he knows how to appeal to Alexander specifically. And then when he gets frustrated because he's trying so hard to steer Alexander into becoming a warrior, and when Alexander refuses to go that way, he gets frustrated and lets his frustration show, and that's when Alexander loses his friendship with him. He'd be like, I thought you were different, but you're just like every other Klingon. Go away. Because he thought he was different because he knew how to relate to him. But at this stage, he kind of dropped all that and just become a warrior, goddammit, and getting frustrated with the fact that his past self won't change. And it's also such a different dynamic once you know that this is an older version of from the future talking to his younger self. Like, it totally recontextualizes those scenes and really makes them so much more interesting. Now, I will say that the reveal does make it seem kind of like an afterthought. Like, oh yeah, by the way, this is time travel, and it happens totally off screen. And it makes it kind of willy-nilly that anyone can time travel. But it's still powerful. It's still interesting. And that scene where he reveals that he's Alexander from the future is like, Father, no, I'm Alexander. Like, when he first said that, I was so shocked. I'm like, what? Like, I didn't believe him at first. And like, you're full of shit. But then when he recounts like the last dying breath of Kalar, like, that was fucking powerful. Like, that was such a powerful scene. I love the callback to Reunion because they mentioned Kalar and her death, but they never really addressed it head on, like how traumatizing that was for Alexander when he says, and you told me to look upon death and never forget, and I never did. Or always remember, and I always have. And that's what convinced Worf that it was Alexander. And because the power of the performance, like how he really sold that weight, was just so powerful. And plus, I love the references to Kalar. Like, earlier in the episode, there was a scene where Alexander has a picture of Kalar by his bedside, and you see Kimpar look at it. And look at it lovingly. And that's another little hint that this was actually Alexander. He's like, oh, was this your mother? And he knows full well. So that was just so goddamn powerful. Now, apparently, and this would have made the episode way better in my opinion, but apparently there had originally wanted to do a scene with Kalar. They originally wrote a scene that was like a dream sequence, I believe. I can't remember whose dream it was, if it was Worf or Alexander or Kimpar's. I can't remember. But there was a dream sequence with Kalar, and so they were going to get Susie Plaxton back to reprise her role as Kalar, but they couldn't get her. Her schedule didn't work. God damn it, fuck! That would have been so amazing. Like, to see Susie Plaskett reprise her role, because that was by far her best Star Trek role. They bring her back in like other roles, like she plays a Q in Voyager and she plays the Andorian in Enterprise, but none of that is as good as Kalar. Like, it's so disappointing that they didn't get. That would have made this episode so much better. It would have really justified it if they were able to get her to reprise her role as Kalar, even if it was not really Kalar, even if it was just a dream sequence or a memory or something. I can't remember what it was, but whatever it was, so disappointing that they weren't able to get her. But it's still a powerful episode. Regardless of that, like, as I said, it's a good character story for Worf, because he starts the episode not, wanting Alexander to become a warrior and being frustrated because he won't, but by the end he learns to. And it's kind of ironic because Kimpar's whole mission was to get Alexander to want to become a warrior, but he failed in that. But instead he ended up affecting Worf and getting him to realize to trust Alexander and allow him to go his own way. In fact, there's a deleted scene, which I wish they didn't delete, with Worf talking to Counselor Troy about it, and Counselor Troy is kind of telling him that, no, you have been a good father, which I know a lot of fans would disagree, but saying the importance of how, comparing it to Worf, saying that a lot of Klingons would say he's not a true Klingon because he went his own way, because he joined Starfleet, he learned the best from humanity, and that he needs to allow Alexander to do the same thing. And yeah, so it's a bit disappointing that scene went. It would have been really good. But even so, like, it's still, the whole ceremony thing, they did with the Kalar Molar, and how Alexander was getting into it because learning about his heritage is very important. But still, doesn't mean that he has to become a warrior. And Worf was coming to terms with that. So, again, DS9 ruined this, but let's not get into that. But it was a powerful character story. It's probably, I dare say, it is probably, other than, I'm not counting Reunion as an Alexander episode, because that's not really an Alexander episode. He does appear in it, but it's not about him, where this episode is about him. So this, I would say, is the best Alexander episode. It's the best episode about Alexander, which, to be fair, there's not many. It's this one and New Ground. Was there another one? Oh, Cost of Living, maybe? So, yeah, not that many, but whatever it's worth, this is the best. I do like this scene. By the way, we get our third and final appearance of... God, what the fuck is that kid's name? I'm thinking Rick, but Rick is wrong. The little kid, who appeared in season 7. Eric! That's it. Right, Eric. Our third and final appearance of Eric. And this is a funny scene, too. It's funny that they're, like, throwing, like... It wasn't water balloons, but it's essentially water balloons, and they're throwing it at each other, and Alexander runs in the room, and he's like, no, don't! When he sees Worf, and Eric, like... pelts Worf with the water balloon, and he's like, oh my god, I didn't mean to hit you! And he, like, ran away. Oh, to see Worf's face. And I like how Worf didn't get too angry over it. He was kind of more upset that Alexander forgot about this important thing. He was too distracted with trying to teach Alexander about the ritual to get upset about it. But yeah, so I think that was a nice character scene for Worf, and it was a really funny scene. Other important thing I gotta mention is who plays Kimpar / future Alexander, and that's Kimtar is his name. Kimtar. And it's James Sloyan, who I've talked about before recently, because I just covered the episode The Alternate, where he plays Odo's dad, or scientist dad, adopted dad, let's say. And he, of course, also appeared as the Romulan defector in the episode The Defector, and he appears later on in the Voyager episode Detrell, playing the title character of that episode. And I mention it because James Sloyan, as I talked about before, is one of the best guest actors that Star Trek has ever had. He's just amazing. He is particularly in The Defector and in Detrell. Those are probably his two best performances. He does such a good job. He does a really good job as Dr. Detrell. Not Detrell. Detrell's Voyager. What's it? Morpole. That's who I'm thinking of on DS9. Those episodes just aren't as good. The 5th season one, The Begotten, is better. I think that's, The Begotten is James Sloyan's last appearance in Star Trek. But yeah. The one thing I will say is that it was hard for me to buy him as future Alexander, just because I recognize him so much from The Defector and from playing Warpole. It's weird to try to picture him as, even though the makeup's different, it's still, his voice is so recognizable and the way he acts is so recognizable that it's hard for me to imagine this is future Alexander. But he does a really good job. As I said, that one scene where he confronts Worf and tells a story about his mother's death was so good, and he really sells that. That being said, this isn't one of his best performances. As I said, that's the Defector and Detrell. But still, he's always a great performance, always a great actor, always great to have him on. So even though it's maybe a little harder for me to buy him as Alexander, it's still perfectly happy that they got such a good actor to play him. So yeah, the side storyline, I did not read up on this episode, so I don't know exactly why Picard wasn't in this episode. I'm pretty sure Patrick Stewart had something else on, like a play or something, because that apparently happens from time to time. And so Picard just is in the first scene, one scene at the beginning of the episode, and then not seen again for the rest of the episode. But as I mentioned before in a previous review, this gives us a chance to see Riker's command style, which we saw a bit more in season 7 than we have in previous seasons. And it does make me wonder if Picard would have, if he was still in command, if he would have found Lursen and Bator. And I do love that Kim Tar, or future Alexander, was counting on the Enterprise not being able to find Lursen and Bator. It actually surprised him that Riker was able to do it, because Riker was using like his back channels and like going to Quark. Like that scene with Quark, as weird as it seems to me, was really good. And the whole back and forth of you have these vouchers, and I'll go ahead and send you the vouchers. It's like, oh, don't bother, I avoided them while we were talking. And that was cool. And they bribes them to get the information, and they chase down Lursen and Bator. And it's funny because we had that scene where they beam down to the mining planet, and Riker doesn't go down because he is in command of the Enterprise, so he sends Data. However, Geordi is kind of acting like he's in command. I noticed that. I complained about Troy acting like she was in command of the away team in Timescape, where it should have been Data. Well, here, Geordi kind of acts like he's in charge. I don't know. Why don't they ever have Data? Like, Gambit at least had Data take command, but they should have Data. He should take charge, man. Don't let your subordinates take charge of their away team. Anyway, and yes, Troy is his subordinate. Let's not get into this whole argument again. Even now, when she has a higher rank than him, he's still second in command, or third in command of the Enterprise. He's still the second officer, so he still outranks her in order of command. But anyway, let's not get into that whole thing again. So that's pretty much, all I have to say about the side story. Lursen and Bator have their brief appearance in this episode, and not much to say about it. They're fine, whatever. Leading up to their big, I think they had already written Generations when they wrote this episode, so they knew that they were going to die already. They're like, we might as well show them one more time before they die. So yeah. All that stuff was all well and good, but really the heart of this episode was the Alexander storyline, which I think was really good. So, I would now like to thank my Patreon supporters for supporting me on Patreon. It's very much appreciated. This helped me continue with the channel. I'd like to give a big special thanks to Brandon Neal Howes and Jordan Johnson and Antarius. Thank you so very much for your very strong support. I would also like to give a shout out to Benjamin Mead, Greg Marley, Francisco, Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky, Matty Jester, Joel Lavals, Alessandro Michelaccio, Norman Buchwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, and Allison Fordyce. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. Alright, so we have a few Patreon comments for this episode. First comment is from Kyrie091, who says, Firstborn, more like worst scorn. This is a Worf episode, if I recall correctly, and it may not feature the gratuitous cleavage of the Duras sisters. I'll be honest, I don't much care for the Alexander stuff, plus he ages weirdly fast. Is he half Ocampan or something? Or maybe he's like that character Jack from the movie Jack. Ever seen that one, Mark? What are the chances you do a review for Jack starring Robin Williams? Or the Naked Gun movies. Those are good too. What were we talking about again? Oh, Alexander, son of Worf. Yeah, he's dumb. Trivia bit, young Alexander is played by the same kid from that Blank Check movie. Now that's a film Mark should discuss. So first of all, 0% chance that I do a review on Jack. 0% chance that I do a review on Blank Check. I haven't seen neither, and I have no inclination to ever see them. Now, the Naked Gun movies, on the other hand, I love. I have seen them recently. I've seen them multiple times. One of some of my favorite comedies of all time. But not likely I will review them because I just, I still want to focus more on Star Trek. But, yeah, Naked Gun movies. You know they're doing a reboot with Liam Neeson? I'm actually willing to give that a shot because Liam Neeson, if you've seen some of his comedy work as a straight man, I think he'd be really good in the role. But as long as because they have to do a careful job of updating it. So, if they don't do a good job with the script, then it doesn't matter how good the acting is. But we'll see. I'm willing to give it a shot. Anyway, yeah, I don't usually care for Alexander stuff either, but this one was good. And yes, you're correct. It does feature the gratuitous cleavage of the Duras sisters. And it features the Duras sisters. Anyway, next comment is from Stephen Kennedy, who says, my rating is 8. Did Odo's daddy change the timeline regarding the Duras sisters? If I remember the movie Generations, did they work with Malcolm McDowell or did they attack the Enterprise because of this episode? Is Worf trying to win Father of the Century? Is the Worf in this episode a different one from the episode Parallels? The reason why Alexander hates Worf the next time we see him is an easy one to explain. The Duras sisters told Alexander all the bad stuff he did to their family, hence why they died in the movie Generations, as Worf was trigger happy. Out of 10. Adjusted comment, I know it was the Duras, the Sisters of Duras. Also, in the next episode of TNG, I will rate Season 7 on average score. I will do the same for the other 3 shows. I wonder which one will win. I give you a clue. It's not TNG. Are you talking about Season 7 of the other 3 shows? Or are you talking about every episode? Because there's no Season 7 of Enterprise or TOS, so there's only 2 other shows with the Season 7, so maybe that's not what you mean. But, let's just say, for example, that is what you mean. If we compare TNG Season 7 to DS9 Season 7 to Voyager Season 7, I think I have to give the edge to DS9 Season 7 just because of that second half is so fucking amazing. It is a good episode. It's just an amazing arc. The first half of DS9 is mediocre, but when you get that second half, it's fucking amazing. But I think close second is TNG Season 7, which is way better than it gets credit for. And way behind in last place would be Season 7 of Voyager. Terrible season. But anyway, um, what else did you say? Did Odo's daddy change the timeline regarding the Dora sister? Oh, Odo's daddy. It's Kim Tar. Yeah, I get it because it's the same actor. I get it. Did they work with Malcolm McDowell or did they attack the Enterprise? Because they worked with Malcolm McDowell. They even had a scene that made that very clear. So it wasn't because of this episode. This episode hadn't even been written yet when they wrote Generations. But anyway, So next comment is from J came in at 99, who says, I really wish there was some sort of follow-up to this episode. The future was probably around the time Picard came out, so maybe Alexander's warning could have inspired him to fake his death during the fight scene during Picard. Granted, I think in this episode they do say the Klingons kill him, but I don't know. Also, we could get time travel. How the time travel line, how did he travel back? Did he use a time crystal? I don't know. I think there's just opportunities with this episode that hasn't happened yet. So I looked this up out of curiosity, and in this episode, this episode takes place in the year 2370, and in this episode, future Alexander says that he's from 40 years in the future, which would place it around 2410. And so I looked up when this Star Trek Picard take place, and Picard seasons 1 through 3 takes place between 2399 and 2402. So Star Trek The Last of Picard season 3 would be 2402, one must assume. And so that's 32 years in the future from this episode, whereas Alexander said he was 40 years in the future. So unless Alexander was exaggerating, because he wouldn't round all the way up from 32 to 40. So, in other words, this future Alexander comes from is supposed to be after the events of Picard season 3. So, and also, I will say in this episode, he does specifically mention how he traveled back. He said he went to some scientist on some weird planet. I don't know. They could have, I suppose it could have been time crystals, but I thought the time crystals were exclusive to whatever the hell the name of that planet is. I'm blanking on it. But anyway, so yeah, I mean, nice try to tie it into Picard season 3, but the unless they changed the time frame on this, it wouldn't quite line up. I still would love to see Alexander and what happened to him in some modern Trek show. Now, I also looked up when Lower Decks and Prodigy takes place, and Lower Decks is only 10 years after this episode, and Prodigy's 13 years after this episode, so Alexander would still, I mean, he'd be an adult, but he still wouldn't be, like, full on like he is in this episode. It's still far off from that, but I would like confirmation that he became a diplomat. That would be nice. That's all I'm asking. I mean, at the moment, though, there is no Star Trek taking place during that time period because we only have Strange New Worlds, and then Academy is coming out, and Strange New Worlds TOS era, the pre-TOS era, and Academy is 1,000 years in the future. So and maybe there'll be a long trek, I suppose, but at the moment, I'm waiting for them to announce something that will take place during this era. Maybe that sitcom that Tawny Newsom's doing on the resort planet. I don't know. They could have Alexander be on the sitcom. Anyway, next comment is from Norman Buckwald, who says, Firstborn should have been the final Alexander episode. I will not even get into the big mistake it was to have him become the rebellious I will participate in the war to show my dad while having no training nonsense we saw on D Space Nine, let alone both the horribly written character and actor that suddenly grew 10 years in 1 year. Instead, the whole concept of a peaceful diplomat Alexander with angst and remorse over his father's death was much more intriguing and a much better farewell to Alexander, as was how Worf shifts in his parenting. One would never have anticipated Worf instead would turn into one of the worst parents in Trek, competing with the likes of Magus Henson or Ichib's parents. In terms of the whole Trek franchise, I guess we now know how Alexander was able to travel, who was able to time travel with the simple time crystal from Hatorora, alone providing more full circle of the significance of the colony in Trek lore. And for Worf, never mind my issue with what I call a MacGuffin lameness of it, but hey, we would have never had quality of mercy, so I will not complain too much. As for this episode, interestingly enough, Alexander was able to find Klingons be part of the ruse. Why it never occurred to him they'd be looking for Lursa and B'Etor is puzzling, and we have to assume the child came into existence maybe before the D was destroyed, or are we even more timey-wimey? I will give this episode 8 batless out of 10, and as far as I'm concerned, that young adult Alexander in DS9 is simply a changeling in disguise, later to succumb to the virus along with loss, and the real Alexander will still fulfill his destiny as a Klingon for peace. Okay, so several things about this comment. So, I think you're implying that in this episode, future Alexander uses a time crystal again. That doesn't really add up with what he said in this episode, let alone the fact that time crystals weren't invented yet until modern Trek. I mean, not in canon, but in real life. But, as far as Lursa and B'Etor, I always saw this as a continuity error, or maybe an indication that this future Alexander comes from a timeline that no longer exists. Because I don't know. It depends on, because time is fluid, as I was just talking about in another video, that the way they portray time in Next Generation, they try to do it as one seasons a year, but they're not exactly clear on the timeline of things, because if you go by the timeline by when they're released, Generations would have happened just a couple months after this episode, and Lursa had just found out she was pregnant, so wouldn't have given her time to give birth. But as I said, time is malleable. Maybe they're saying Generations actually happened like a year after this episode, and yeah, and maybe that's the case, and so I don't know, but then that messes with the timeline with when the Enterprise D was destroyed, as mentioned in D Space Nine when Worf joins. But I don't know how you figure. You could say it's possible. In other words, it's possible that Lursa gave birth before she was killed. But I was always under the impression that she didn't have time to do it, and I could be wrong. I have no proof of that. But I always think that maybe the timeline changed so that she never had a son. So maybe it would be interesting if we did get confirmation one way or another. I kind of think, because in this future, Alexander is talking about this, battle, this fighting between the House of Mogh and the House of Duras, but the House of Mogh doesn't actually exist anymore. It was destroyed in season 4 of Deep Space Nine, and Worf and Alexander joined the House of Martok, and Kern just got his memory wiped and joined another family, which that's again another thing I really hate that Deep Space Nine did. And so there is no House of Mogh. And if Lursa was killed before giving birth, then there's also no House of Duras. So maybe this future is just completely erased from history. But I still think Alexander needs to be a diplomat, though. Yeah, and yes, I could not obviously agree with you more that this would have been a nice farewell episode for Alexander. And you know, if they needed to bring Alexander back, what they should have done when they had Worf join Deep Space Nine in season 4, instead of saying, "Oh, I sent Alexander off to Earth," like they do play lip service to that because he puts up a little picture of himself and Alexander in his room. I think in the first episode he arrives to the station, or maybe one of the earlier ones. But what they should have done is actually, why not have him bring Alexander? Why not make Alexander a recurring character? I mean, you did it with fucking O'Brien and Molly and Keiko. You brought them along. Why not if you're going to bring in Worf, why not bring Alexander along and say, hey, I'm going to raise him on Deep Space Nine? But they were too lazy. They're like, we can't be bothered doing that. Let's just say he sent him off to Earth to live with his grandparents. Problem with that is you make him a bad father. And that's why I keep saying that, because people keep talking about how terrible Father Worf is, but it's due to lazy writing. It's due to the writers being like, I can't be bothered writing Alexander. Let's just... And then with the bullshit they did with bringing him back in Deep Space Nine, where he grew 10 years within a span of a couple years, and that he's all of a sudden acting completely and totally out of character, is just further character assassination. So that's character assassination I'll get to when I get to DS9. Because I just talked about Wesley's character assassination in the last episode. Alexander's character assassination actually comes later in Deep Space Nine Season 6. But here, this would have been a perfect ending, not just for Alexander, but it would have been a great way to be like, look, Worf is a great father, see? But then no, Deep Space Nine had to go and ruin that and make him a terrible father again. So thanks very much, patrons, for your comments. So my rating for Firstborn out of 10 is actually going to be a 9. Excellent. Yeah, I'm upping my rating. In the past, when I did my season by review, I gave it an 8. I actually, as I said, I appreciate this episode more, and I think I'm starting to feel more about it than I did when I first saw this episode. It's, yes, the time travel is kind of hokey, and they just throw it in with a line of dialogue, and it seems kind of casual, but it's a really good character story for Worf and Alexander. I think it's actually, if it wasn't for the DS9 bullshit, it would actually justify Worf as a good father. He said he was from 40 years in the future. I remember where that would place him in the timeline with Modern Trek. I would love if Modern Trek would show Alexander and show that he's actually like an ambassador or a diplomat or something. That would make this episode even better, would justify it. But anyway, no, it's a great character story. As I said, it has that rewatchability aspect to it, where you go back and watch it again knowing that this is future Alexander. It makes everything make more sense, and I think that's actually fucking brilliant writing. And of course, James Sloyan is always awesome. His performances are always great, so that's a huge plus. Plus, even with the B plot, like, you get to see Riker in command. You get to see his command style and how it's different from Picard's, and you get the Quark cameo, which is good. So yeah, overall, this is just a really good episode. I mean, it may seem a bit slow at times, but I think it works for on the character level. So yeah, I am warming up to this episode a lot. 9 out of 10 for this episode. So that is it for my review of Firstborn. If you enjoyed this review or this video and all the other stuff I do, you may consider supporting me on Patreon. There's a link in the description below. There's different tiers for different levels, different rewards. I do a Patreon-only video series for my Patreon supporters where I revisit reviews that I've done in the past, revisit episodes I've already reviewed, go into greater detail, stuff like that. I also have pre-releases, and you can request a video for me to do, stuff like that. You can check it out if you're so inclined. If not, and you do still want to support the channel, you can also be a huge help, a huge support of the channel, if by leaving a like, leaving a comment, subscribing, all those stuff also really helps me out a lot. So if you are a fan of the channel, I would highly recommend, if you haven't already, leaving your top 10 favorite episodes and top 10 least favorite episodes of Star Trek Next Generation in the comment section below. I will withhold these comments and save them and gather them all together and contabulate them to make a top 10 viewers of EOE's Chapman of Eternity's viewers, top 10 best episodes of TNG and top 10 worst episodes of TNG. I'll be doing a live stream at the end of the month once I finish covering Next Generation, and so the more submissions I get, the better. It would be great to hear from everyone and sort of find out what everyone's combined top 10 best and top 10 worst of TNG. So you can leave that in the comment section below in this video or any other of my videos. Doesn't matter. I'll see it. Yeah, so that would be great if you can contribute to that as well. So let's see what's coming up next on the old channel here. So Monday I'll be over on Patreon doing the Patreon exclusive video, revisiting my review for the Mogh parts 1 and 2. Wednesday I'll be back here on my main channel with another TNG review, reviewing the episode Bloodlines. And then Thursday reviewing the next TNG episode, Emergence. And then on Saturday, I'm back over the Patreon for another Patreon-exclusive revisited video, this time revisiting my review for The Wire, classic Garrick episode. So that's what's coming up on my channel. Be sure to check it out as I continue to cover, getting close to the end now, covering TNG and also covering Star Trek Deep Space Nine, one episode at a time, and many other shows as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.